The match was over. The champion had won. The trophy was waiting. And the stadium was emptying. Think about that for a second. 10,000 people. A sold-out final at one of the most historic tennis venues in the world. And they were leaving, not because they were angry, not because something went wrong, not because the match was disappointing. They were leaving because the only person they came to see had already done what they came to watch. And they were done. What Aryna Sabalenka witnessed in those few frozen seconds at the net in Rome on May 12, 2026, it wasn't just a loss. It was something she had never experienced in her entire career, something no ranking, no Grand Slam title, no #1 ranking could have prepared her for. And the words she said afterward? They revealed everything about what tennis is quietly becoming. But before we get there, let me take you back to the moment it started. Because it didn't begin at the net. It didn't begin when the final point was struck. It began 2 weeks earlier, when a 20-year-old Filipino walked into the Foro Italico and turned the entire Italian Open into something none of the organizers, none of the analysts, none of the veterans of this sport had ever seen before. Alex Eala was ranked 38 in the world. She was 20 years old. She was not supposed to be here, not in the final, not against the world #1, not in a match that would make the entire tennis world stop and stare. But here she was. And more remarkably, here they were. Thousands of them. Filling every section of the Central Stadium with red, white, and blue. Philippine flags hanging from railings, draped across shoulders, waving in the Roman sunlight. OFWs, overseas Filipino workers, who had traveled from London, from Germany, from Switzerland, from France, spending money they had carefully saved for weeks, taking precious days off work, leaving behind the families they were already far too far from. All of it. For her. And that is where this story really begins. Not in the scoreline. Not in the statistics. But in the question that nobody had thought to ask until now. What happens when loyalty is stronger than sport? Let me set the scene for you, because the scoreboard alone doesn't capture what happened. The final reads 6-4, 6-3. Alex Eala, the 20-year-old Filipina ranked 38th in the world, had just defeated Aryna Sabalenka, the world #1, in straight sets. On paper, it was the biggest upset of the clay season. In the record books, it was Eala's first WTA 1000 title, a landmark in the career of one of the sport's most exciting young players. Her ranking would jump to a career-high number 22. By any measure, it was a historic moment. But none of that explains what Sabalenka saw when she looked up. She walked to the net the way champions walk to the net after a loss. Composed, dignified, arms extended. She had lost before. She knew how to absorb a defeat with grace. The handshake, the murmured congratulations, the brief embrace, she had done it all before. But when she looked toward the stands in that moment, something was wrong. The stadium was moving. Not in the way crowds move when they celebrate. Not in the frenzied rush of fans who want to get closer to the winner. It was moving in the other direction. Thousands of people were standing up, folding their flags, turning toward the exits. And they weren't hurrying, they weren't storming out in anger or frustration. They were simply leaving, calmly, purposefully as one. Sabalenka stood there, hands extended, watching the red, white and blue sea drain out of the Central Stadium like a tide going out. "What's happening?" she reportedly asked the umpire. The umpire had no answer. Because there was no rulebook for this. There was no precedent. In the history of the Italian Open, in the history of this cathedral of tennis, with its marble statues and its ancient clay courts, fans had never walked out of a final before the trophy ceremony. It simply wasn't done. But something had fundamentally changed in that stadium, and what changed it was not a score, not a result, not a headline. It was a bond so powerful that it didn't need the match to continue for it to mean something. And what happened next, what Sabalenka said in that press conference, that's where this story turns into something that goes far beyond tennis. The journalists expected the usual post-loss performance. The gracious defeat. The compliments. The promises to work harder. Sabalenka had given that press conference 100 times. She could do it in her sleep. But when she sat down in front of the cameras that evening, something was different. Her composure was still there, but behind it, something had cracked. I've played in front of many crowds, she began, her voice steady, carrying a weight that no camera could fully capture. I've played in Grand Slam finals. I've played in front of 20,000 people. I've heard them cheer for me. I've heard them cheer against me. She paused, and in that pause the entire room leaned forward. But I've never seen a crowd leave like that. Not after a final. Not after a championship match. The room was silent. It wasn't about me, she continued. It wasn't about the tennis. It was about her. They came for her. They stayed for her. And when she was done, they left. A journalist asked if she felt disrespected. Sabalenka thought for a moment, and then she said something that stopped everyone in that room cold. No, I felt invisible. For the first time in my career, I felt invisible. Not because of anything Alex did, because of what she represents. Her people love her in a way that I don't think any of us have experienced before. She paused again, searching, and you could see her searching, turning over words the way you turn over stones looking for something underneath. It's not jealousy. It's not resentment. It's recognition. She has something that can't be bought, can't be manufactured, can't be earned through results alone. She has a nation. She has a nation. Let that land for a second. Because here is Aryna Sabalenka, world #1, Grand Slam champion, one of the most decorated players of her generation, sitting in a press conference after losing a match, and the thing that undid her wasn't the loss. It was the realization that no amount of winning could give her what Eala already had at 20 years old. But to truly understand what happened at the Central Stadium that evening, you need to understand who those fans actually were. Because calling them fans almost undersells it. What you saw in that stadium was not a fan section. It was a diaspora. They were nurses from London, engineers from Germany, caregivers from Switzerland, seafarers from ports across the Mediterranean. These were overseas Filipino workers, OFWs, people who had left the Philippines not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Because the Philippines, for all its warmth and beauty and heart, does not have enough opportunity for every one of its children. And so they left. They worked the long shifts. They sent money home every month. They watched their children's birthdays over video calls. They missed graduations and funerals and first steps and first words. They carried the Philippines inside them across continents and oceans, always telling themselves they would go home someday, always sending pieces of themselves back ahead of them. And then Alex Eala started winning. And something extraordinary happened. Something that no sports strategist could have predicted, no marketing team could have engineered. These scattered, separated, quietly homesick Filipinos across Europe found a reason to gather. They found a flag to wave that wasn't just symbolic, it was personal. When Eala stepped onto a court, something deeper than fandom was activated. It was recognition. It was pride. It was the feeling of being seen by the world through someone who looked like them, who spoke like them, who carried their flag across the grandest stages in the sport. When Alex plays, it's not just tennis, one fan explained to a reporter outside the stadium after the exodus. It's a reunion. It's a reminder of who we are. The Italian Open was not a vacation for these people. It was a pilgrimage. They had spent money they had carefully saved. They had taken days off that cost them real wages. They had organized coaches and carpools across European borders. They had arrived at the Foro Italico carrying flags and food and photographs and the particular energy of people who are celebrating something sacred. They had chanted Laban Alex, the Filipino word for fight, until their voices gave out. They had cried when she won. They had cried when she struggled. They were not spectators watching a match. They were participants in something much larger than a tournament. And when that match ended, when Eala struck the final winner and the scoreboard confirmed what everyone in that stadium already felt, their pilgrimage was complete. They didn't need the trophy ceremony. They didn't need the speeches. The moment they had crossed borders and spent savings and taken time from their lives to witness, that moment had happened. So they folded their flags and they went home. Not in protest. Not in disrespect. In completion. The fan who spoke to the reporter outside the stadium said it with the kind of simple clarity that only completely honest people can manage. We came for Alex. Not for Italy, not for the Italian Open. for Alex. And when she finished, we finished. Sabalenka, watching from the net, understood. Maybe not fully, not yet. But she understood enough to feel it. And here is where the story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. Not even Sabalenka herself. In the days after Rome, as the Italian Open faded into the tennis calendar and the world moved on to the next tournament, Sabalenka didn't move on. Something from that evening stayed with her. Something she couldn't shake by analyzing her forehand or adjusting her tactical approach or grinding through practice sessions. Because what she had experienced at the Central Stadium wasn't a tactical problem. It was an existential one. She had spent her entire life chasing recognition. She had climbed the rankings year by year, match by match. She had won Grand Slams. She had reached number 1 in the world. She had achieved everything the sport could offer, every trophy, every title, every honor that tennis could place in her hands. And she had done it on pure will, on ferocity, on the kind of relentless competitive drive that makes champions. But she had never had what Eala had. Not once. Not for a single tournament, a single match, a single moment. She had never had a nation. She had never had 110 million people waving her flag. She had never had a diaspora crossing continents to watch her play, not for the tennis, not for the ranking, but for her. For what she represents. For the feeling she gives people who needed something to hold on to. It's not something you can earn, Sabalenka said later, reflecting on the experience with the honesty that her usual press conference composure rarely allowed. It's something you were given. She was given the Philippines. And the Philippines was given her. There is a profound sadness in that sentence, if you let yourself feel it. Because Sabalenka is not a cold person. She is not distant or indifferent. She is a competitor who has given everything she has to the sport that made her. She has sacrificed enormously, her body, her time, her personal life, in pursuit of excellence. And she has achieved that excellence. By every measurable standard in tennis, she is elite. But you cannot manufacture love like that. You cannot train for it. You cannot earn it through results alone, however brilliant those results might be. The kind of love that Alex Eala carries, the kind that sends nurses and engineers and caregivers across European borders to wave flags in a stadium, that kind of love is given, not earned. It is born out of something deeper than sport. It is born out of identity and sacrifice, and the particular longing of people who are far from home and desperately need something that feels like home. I was upset in the moment, Sabalenka admitted. I won't lie. You work so hard. You put everything into a tournament and then the crowd leaves before the trophy ceremony. That hurts. That's a human thing to feel. She paused. But then I thought about it. I thought about who those fans actually are. About what it costs them to be there. About what they left behind to be in that stadium. And I understood. It wasn't about me. It was never about me. It was about her. And that's okay. That's okay. 2 words that contain so much. Because for a competitor of Sabalenka's intensity to sit in a press conference and say that the crowd leaving her final was okay, that is not a small thing. That is someone who has genuinely wrestled with something uncomfortable and come out the other side with a clarity that most people spend a lifetime searching for. Some victories are not measured by trophies. Some loyalties are not bound by tradition. Some bonds are simply stronger than sport. The trophy ceremony at the Central Stadium proceeded without the crowd. The few fans who remained, Italians mostly, people who had come for the tennis rather than the player, applauded politely. Alex Eala lifted the silver cup, her smile wide and real, her eyes searching the stands. The stands that had, 2 hours earlier, been the loudest, most passionate, most visually arresting crowd she had ever played in front of. The flags were gone. The chants were gone. The sea of red, white, and blue that had transformed this ancient Roman venue into something resembling a Filipino national celebration, gone. The marble statues stood silent in the evening light. The clay courts, churned by the boots of champions over 2 weeks of competition, waited to be rolled and groomed and rested. And somewhere in the corridor below the stands, a 20-year-old champion found her mother. Where did everyone go? Alex Eala asked. Aryna Sabalenka smiled through tears. She had been crying. The good kind of crying, The kind that happens when something you've hoped for and sacrificed for and poured yourself into finally arrives. She wiped her eyes and looked at her daughter. "They went home, Anik," she said. "They came for you. You gave them everything they came for. So they went home. They went home." Think about that. They traveled from across Europe. They spent money they had carefully saved. They took days off work they could not easily replace. They carried their flags through train stations and airports and hotel lobbies. They chanted until they had no voice left. And when it was over, when the moment they had built their whole trip around had finally arrived and passed, they simply went home. Because the thing they came for had happened. Because she had given them what they needed. That is not a crowd. That is a people. And that distinction, that difference between fans who follow a player and a people who claim a player as their own, is the thing that is quietly reshaping the future of this sport. Because tennis has always been a global game, but it has never quite been this. It has never had this specific phenomenon, this convergence of diaspora loyalty and digital connection, and a player who carries not just her own ambitions onto the court but the weight of an entire nation's longing. Every time Eala wins, it is not just a result on a scoreboard. It is a signal sent across 110 million people. A proof of something. A reminder that one of their own is out there, on the grandest stages in the world, competing with the best and beating them. And for people who spend their lives far from home, giving their best years to economies that are not their own, sending their wages across oceans to families they can only visit occasionally, that signal means something that is almost impossible to put into words. It means, we are here. We are seen. We matter. Aryna Sabalenka is 30 years old. She has been the best player in the world. She has won everything the sport can offer her. And she is asking herself a question now that she never had to ask before Rome. A question that no coach can answer and no training program can solve. Can she ever have what Eala has? Can she build that bond, that loyalty, that level of devotion that turns fans into pilgrims? Or is this simply a thing that cannot be manufactured? A gift that is either given to you by the circumstances of who you are and where you come from, or it isn't. She already knows the answer. That is why she said what she said. She has a nation. Not in bitterness. Not in resentment. In recognition. Because Sabalenka, whatever her flaws and fierce edges, is perceptive enough to see clearly what happened in Rome. She is wise enough to understand that the crowd that left the Central Stadium was not rejecting her. They were simply answering a call that had nothing to do with her. A call that was older and deeper and more powerful than any rivalry or any result. The Philippine flags will come back. They will come back at the French Open, at Wimbledon, at the US Open, at wherever Alex Eala plays next. They will fill more stadiums. They will get louder. They will wave longer and harder and with more desperate, beautiful, homesick intensity than ever before. Because that is what happens when a people finds its champion. The bond does not weaken. It deepens. It gathers weight and history and memory. It becomes something that lasts longer than a career, longer than a tournament, longer than a season. And Sabalenka will be there for many of those matches. She will stand across the net. She will fight with everything she has, because that is who she is, that is the only language her competitive soul speaks. And she will hear the chants and see the flags and feel what she felt in Rome. The question isn't whether she can win against Eala again. She will. She has too much experience, too much firepower, too much competitive IQ to let a 20-year-old dominate her indefinitely. That is simply the nature of elite sport. The real question, the one that nobody in tennis is quite ready to ask out loud, is this: what happens to this sport when loyalty like this enters the arena? What happens when the crowd's connection to a player is so deep that the match itself is almost secondary to the feeling of being there together? What happens when tennis becomes not just a competition between players but a gathering of people who needed a reason to find each other? Rome gave us the beginning of an answer. The Central Stadium emptied before the trophy ceremony. The world number one stood frozen at the net, watching it happen, feeling something that her entire career had never prepared her for. And in that silence, in that strange, echoing quiet where 10,000 people had been just moments before, the future of women's tennis was quietly announcing itself. It looks like a 20-year-old Filipina lifting a silver cup in Rome with tears on her cheeks and her mother's voice in her ear. It sounds like 10,000 voices chanting one word, Laban. And it feels like something that, once you have witnessed it, you cannot unsee. Something that changes how you understand what sport is, what it does, why it matters, not just to the players, but to every single person who shows up and waves a flag and gives a piece of themselves to a player who carries their identity into the arena with her every single time. Aryna Sabalenka will go back to the drawing board. She will study the tapes. She will find adjustments. She will chase Eala across the clay season and beyond with everything she has. Because that is what champions do. That is the only answer she knows how to give. But somewhere in the quiet of a locker room in Rome, as the stadium above her emptied and the marble statues of the Foro Italico watched in silence, the world number one understood something that no ranking could quantify and no trophy could symbolize. Some things in this world are not built. They are given. And the greatest of those gifts, the one that no amount of excellence can manufacture, is the love of a people who have decided, completely and without reservation, that you belong to them. Alex Eala has that gift. At 20 years old. At WTA ranking 22. With her whole career still ahead of her. The question is not what she'll do with it. The question is what it will do to tennis. Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story hit different for you, if you felt something watching those flags wave and those fans walk out, subscribe because there are more stories like this one coming. Stories that go past the scoreline, past the statistics, into the heart of why sport matters and what it does to the people who give themselves to it. The stadium is empty now. The clay is still. But somewhere, a nation is already planning its next pilgrimage.